The Haason Reddick situation is frustrating for the Jets, but it could present some players an opportunity. I'll explain today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, July 26th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On today's show, we're doing a mailbag. Normally, we do our mailbag shows each week on Wednesday. Haason Reddick had other ideas for us this week. We spent our Wednesday show talking about Haason Reddick's holdout, so we pushed the mailbag to Friday this week. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. Thank you for your patience. And fittingly, our first question is about Haason Reddick. John, I'm frustrated to see Reddick is holding out. Still, I feel like it might be an opportunity for other players to potentially step up and shine with the more reps they get. What do you think? I talked about this a bit on Wednesday, and I think that there's something to that. I think especially when we're talking about training camp. I think that the biggest beneficiary of this might be Will McDonald, because he's going to increase his practice reps in training camp. And I've spoken extensively about this through the years. These offseason practices and even training camp in this day and age, I don't think they really benefit veterans all that much. I think that, to the extent they matter, it's about putting in the system. But, do we really need this much training camp now? Not to get maybe you do to install the system. You don't need it to get the players in shape. The other area where I do think training camp can be beneficial beyond installing your system is with a younger player. And this goes for the offseason practices as well. A guy like Reddick, he knows how to play. Robert Saleh kind of mentioned this earlier in the week that, he's not worried about Reddick's ability to get ready to play. A guy like Will McDonald, he's young, he's got tools, he's unrefined. How's he going to get better? There's really only one way. He needs reps. He's got to work on his technique, learn how to use his arms to disengage, learn a few more pass rushing moves. It's only done through practice. So he's getting more practice reps. It could benefit the Jets. And, I like to think about this defensive end position holistically. And the way I view it is, last year you essentially had a 3-man rotation. I know other guys rotated in, but 3 guys carried the bulk of the snaps. Essentially, you had 3 starters instead of 2 because of how much the Jets rotate guys in. And last year you had JFM, John Franklin Myers, who of course now is in Denver. Bryce Huff, who's now in Philadelphia, and Jermaine Johnson, who's still here. And, it's easy to think about these players like replacing each other one-to-one. Like Huff subbing in for Huff being subbed out for Reddick. That's natural because they're both natural pass rushers. They switch teams. As I've mentioned, it's almost like a trade. But JFM and Will McDonald are 2 very different types of players. So I almost think as much as you could say one-to-one, Huff was traded for Reddick, and I think there's something to that. Holistically, I think you're trying to replace the production of the 3 from last year with the 3 from this year. And that can come in many ways. It can come from Jermaine Johnson improving. He's coming off of a season where he earned a Pro Bowl berth, 7.5 sacks. Can he get that up to 9-10? It's a little marginal improvement from Jermaine could help that out. I don't think Jermaine needs to do that. I mean, the thing about Jermaine is he's excellent against the run. So when you can play the run, you don't necessarily need to be as great of a pass rusher. You don't need to be as dynamic of a pass rusher. But if he improves a little bit, that could be helpful. Reddick historically through his career has been a more consistent player than Huff. I think the Jets, one of the things the Jets did was they were trading for consistency rather than the theory of the ascending player who's going to continue to break out. The wild card in all this is McDonald. And, he's not really a JFM replacement because JFM was really more of a power end kind of guy. He was so big, defensive ends in a 4-man defensive line typically aren't 290, pounds. So he could clog the running lanes as he collapsed the pocket. He was good at both. Usually guys who are as big as JFM aren't great pass rushers, but JFM could do, especially if they're adept at stopping the run. JFM could do both. McDonald would have to do it in a different way, but essentially, you're trying to get the same or better production from 3 guys. So I don't think it's necessarily a one-to-one. I think holistically, you're trying to get more production this year, the same production is pretty good because the Jets' defensive end position was very good last year. Try to get the same or more production from this three as you did from last year's three. I'll throw it. There's another wild card in the mix, and that is like the one guy who I think in theory could replace JFM's role to a degree. He's not as good. He's not going to be as good as JFM, but that could be Michael Clemens, because Michael Clemens was kind of like the backup for JFM last year. And when JFM needed a break and the Jets wanted to put someone in who could also kind of clog the running lanes and still collapse the pocket, Clemens was in there. He didn't do it anywhere near at the level of JFM. We'll see how much he improves, but more practice reps from him, maybe that could benefit him. Now, I think he's going to be the fourth defensive end, so I think he's not going to have as big of a role. But maybe if he can give the Jets higher caliber snaps than he did last year, that's the type of thing that can help. Ultimately, though, I think the big beneficiary is McDonald, because he's going to get the reps that he needs in order to improve his game. Next question, John. The situation's a mess with Reddick. Do you think the Jets are going to trade him? Okay. Listen to Wednesday's show, because the first thing I said, look, I was critical of the Jets on Wednesday, certainly, and I think they deserve criticism for the way they've handled this. However, at the very start of the show said, let's not panic. And with all due respect to my listener, who I love, who sent in the question, that to me seems to be panic. Anything can happen in the long run. There's no question about it. The situation is, there's no guarantee this is going to have a happy outcome for the Jets. I think we're a long way away from Haason Reddick being traded, though. I think that all the incentive is for Reddick to be there week one. Now, look, all the incentive is for him to be in training camp and avoid the fines, but the price just keeps getting steeper and steeper for Reddick to skip what the Jets are doing here. And once he starts skipping week one, he loses out on game checks. And you have to remember, he's making over $14 million a year. So every game he skips, he's losing not quite $1 million, but close to $1 million. It's one thing to take a $50,000 a day fine in training camp, and that does add up if you skip the entire training camp. But it's very different to sit out games. And the other aspect of this is that if Reddick wants a new contract, and if the Jets are not going to budge, and the indications are so far that the Jets aren't really in the mood to budge on a new contract, and we could argue the merits of that all day long, but right or wrong, I think the Jets don't seem like they're going to budge on this right now. The only way for Reddick to get a new contract is to play out the season. And he's got to produce at a high level, because there's always skepticism once you hit 30 years old. There's always a degree of skepticism. So he's got to go out there and have a big season. So there's going to be plenty of motivation. There's plenty of motivation for him to take the field, because he's got to get paid. But there's also plenty of motivation for him to play well, because if you're trying to get paid, this is his contract season. And I don't know, maybe that's what the Jets were thinking when they made this trade. I mean, I think there's a lot we could talk about, a lot we did talk about the other day with how the Jets have handled this. But, I just don't see a trade happening. I would be very surprised at this point in time. Of course, things can change. And I would never predicted we would have gotten to this point where Reddick's holding out of training camp. So, I mean, obviously anything can happen. But while I'm not saying it's impossible, what I'm saying is that we have a long way to go to get to that point. We have a long way to go to get to the point where I'm even concerned, where I'm even convinced Reddick's going to sit out games. So I don't think you worry about things until you have a reason to worry about them. And look, I understand that Reddick being holding out is not convenient, but I think that ultimately, I don't know if cooler heads will prevail is the right term, because I don't think Reddick will be happy to report if he doesn't have a new contract. But ultimately, you have to look at the incentives for the parties involved. And for Reddick, every incentive remains for him to play out the season. Now, does that mean he will? No. Sometimes people don't respond to the right incentives. But I think if you're looking at this logically and you're trying to put odds on it, I would put the odds much higher that he'll be on the field week one than anything else. And I think the trade would only be a last resort. And I think a lot more would have, as much as things have gone badly right now, I think a lot more would have to go wrong in the weeks ahead for that to even be a consideration. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we've been talking a lot about a veteran, Haason Reddick. Let's turn our attention to the rookie class. Who could step up this year for the Jets in their rookie class? I have some thoughts, and I'll give them to you as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to take home that MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue with our mailbag. Our next question, John, with the selection of Olu Fashanu, 11th overall this year, do you think that potentially phases out Morgan Moses? Do you think Moses is still an important player on this team? I think Moses is going to start at right tackle. That's what I think. I think that I have a couple thoughts on this. Number one is I'm a big believer, and this is true regardless of who you got, regardless of injury histories at the tackle positions, regardless of age at the tackle position. I'm a big believer that in today's NFL, you need 3 starting tackles because you just think about all the bodies that are near the offensive, that you're playing near the offensive line, all the contact that's going on. Injuries happen on the offensive line. Now we hope it doesn't happen. We hope they don't happen at the degree they've happened to the Jets over the last couple of years, but you have to have offensive line depth, and it's easier said than done because there just aren't many good offensive linemen in the league, and almost everybody who's good is a starter. I think looking at the recent track record of tackles who start as rookies, even first round picks, there's a lot of very uneven play. Now, I think that Fashanu, the expectation would be that he could play at a higher level than like some of the guys just been throwing out the last couple of years as their backup tackles, because there have been points where they've had to put guys on the field at tackle who are not NFL caliber players. I don't think it's fair to expect great play out of Fashanu as a rookie. Look, you take it, it's possible, but usually there's a transition, even for highly touted tackle prospects. So I think Fashanu could play. I think he could be, I think he could be a guy that doesn't kill you. I think that's the way I view it. I don't think he's going to be a guy who dominates. I think he's going to be a guy who just does enough to be viable. I think that's the fair thing to ask from him. So in Moses, you have a guy who's like a veteran, a reliable veteran. The other aspect of this is obviously Tyron Smith's playing left tackle. Guys, borderline. I don't know if he's a borderline. Maybe he's just a future Hall of Famer, period. I have some skepticism about putting Fashanu at right tackle for a year. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I think it might be better to just have Fashanu work at left tackle, have him learn from Tyron Smith at practice, let him learn on the practice field. Moses, you have a solid veteran, and if you need to, if there's an injury at right tackle, then you can talk about plugging Fashanu. And I think that Fashanu is the future for the Jets on the offensive line if all goes well. But this year, let's stick with the veterans. Veterans know how to play. And Fashanu could be the third tackle. And I think, what do I want in the third tackle? I want a guy who, can be viable. Not a guy who's going to dominate. A guy who could be viable. And I think Fashanu as a rookie, that's kind of like the way I view him. I view him as a guy who I expect, not going to dominate. He's still got some stuff to learn. He'll hopefully add some upper body strength as he enters the league. And, he'll be a guy who doesn't destroy you if he has to play. And that's pretty much what you want out of a backup tackle. And the other reason, beyond what I said, I know I said no matter what the situation is, you want 3 starting caliber tackles. Well, especially when you have a couple 33-year-old starting tackles, especially when you have a guy in Tyron Smith who, let's be honest, if Tyron Smith plays 75% of the snaps this year, you'd sign up. I think he's worth the money if he plays 75% of the snaps. And that's got to be the goal when you look at his injury history. Offensive injuries always happen on the offensive line, but a guy like Smith, there are certain guys who are more injury prone than others. You can always have like an accident on the offensive line. That's one of the things, like people say injury prone doesn't exist because anybody can get injured. And that's true. Look, freak injuries do happen, but it's also true that some guys are more injury prone than others. Smith is definitely among the more injury prone players in the league. You can't, look, there's no way. It's very unlikely he's playing 17 games. I'm not going to say there's no way because anything can happen, but I don't think the expectation is Tyron Smith's playing 17 games. I think the hope is maybe he gives you 13, and then maybe Fashanu can just give you steady play for the other 4. Next question, John, beyond the first round pick of Fashanu and the third round pick of Corley, which rookie do you have your eye on to step up this year? I'm changing my answer. After the draft, I would have said Isaiah Davis, but I think I'm going to roll with Braylon Allen right now. I actually wrote an article this week on GangGreenNation.com about how I've evolved in my thinking on Braylon Allen. And, one of the things I don't like about the draft process is people look at these prospects and they make the decision on these prospects. It's almost like you're in politics where once you make a decision, you have to you have to like keep the same opinion no matter what evidence is in front of you. And that's not the way I just don't think that's a good way to view things. I think you just keep learning about guys. And if your initial assessment changes, then that's fine. If the evidence points you in a different direction, that's analysis. I'm not claiming to be perfect. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm giving you the best answer I have with the information I have at the time. And I'm always seeking new information. And the more I dig on Allen, the more I'm intrigued by him. He's a guy who dominated the Big Ten as a 17-year-old who should have been a high school senior. So you think about that. This dude's like going out there, he's averaging close to 7 yards per carry in one of the maybe the top 2 conferences in the country as a guy who should have been a high school senior. Last 2 years, he's dealt with injuries. I think, one of the things I looked at, one of the things that struck me when I watched him, and it's difficult to judge this, but he looked slower his last year. And his last 2 years weren't as good as his first year. His junior year, he just looked slower to me. So I Googled, because I had a thought in mind. So when a guy looks slower, sometimes that they put on sometimes they've just bulked up too much. So I Googled Braylon Allen bulked up, and sure enough, he decided, he added 10 pounds of muscle before last season. And sometimes that slows you down. He's already a big back. He's already a guy who can run through arm tackles before he added those 10 extra pounds. I think he's even mentioned that, his ideal playing weight is probably around 235 or something like that. He was at 245 last year. So he's still plenty big. He's still a huge back at 235. He drops those 10 pounds. Maybe he adds that explosiveness back. And also, I like his hands. It seems to seem like he's got soft. They didn't use him that much in the past receiving game at Wisconsin, but he's got soft hands. And like most running backs aren't great route runners. I mean, you'll see the guy running an occasional good route. It's really just most of the time when you're catching the passes or running back, you're either catching a check down or a screen. It's really just about making the catch. And I saw Allen adjust to some poorly thrown balls and pluck them out of the air. And then after that, like if you're catching a check down on a screen, it's really what you can do with the ball in your hands. And that's really kind of just simulating a handoff at that point, because essentially then that's what running backs are there for. Running backs are there to get the ball and, make a play with it. And so I don't know. I'm kind of intrigued by Allen. Stigger is the CFL corner is also really intriguing. He was apparently one of the stars of the offseason program. So I don't know. I still like Davis, the other running back the Jets drafted. So, I mean, I'm intrigued. I'm always a big believer. You got to give rookies a chance. You got to see what you got there. So, maybe I'm not the best judge of this, but I think I'm evolving on this. I remember after the draft, I said I felt Davis would be better than Allen. Now I'm not so sure. I've done a lot of more research on Allen. I think Allen's got a shot to be a very good player in this league. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a guy who has become a very good player in this league, Quincy Williams. He had his breakout season last year. Was it really a breakout season? Will he continue it, or was it just a career year and is regression due? I'll give you my thoughts continuing here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. We just talked about some Jets rookies who the team selected in the NFL draft. It would be nice if you had a draft for your business, but it's not that easy for people who own businesses that aren't in the NFL. Well, that's where LinkedIn comes in. LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals you can't get anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We're doing our weekly mailbag a couple days late because of Haason Reddick. Let's continue. John, was Quincy Williams last year a breakout season, or was it just a career year, and is he going to fall back to earth this year? I'm optimistic about Quincy. There are always some things that I look at when a player has a big year, and that's one of the things that kind of points me in the direction of whether I think it's going to be, whether it was a true breakout or whether he was just going to fall back to earth. The first thing I look at is, was he in a contract year? And the answer is no. He just signed a new contract. So he didn't have that contract motivation. It wasn't even on the horizon. He just got a new contract. And if you're Quincy's agent, you just have to be distraught over this situation, because you probably like, Quincy, why couldn't you have done that the year before when you were seeking a new contract? Why couldn't you have been a first team All Pro the year before you got the new contract? because now the Jets have one of the best value contracts in the league, not just at the linebacker position. I think Quincy Williams' contract is one of the best in the league at any position, because they have a first-team All-Pro at a very reasonable price for the next couple of years. So there was no new contract motivation. We talked about that about Reddick a little bit earlier. The driving force that can be seeking a new contract. Quincy did not have that. The other thing I look at is, were there indications that the guy was doing things that weren't sustainable? And the answer to that's no. And sometimes, like with a pass rusher, he'll have a lot of sacks, but he'll have a low pressure rate. If you're not getting to the quarterback consistently, odds are your sack total is going to go down in the future. That's just what the numbers tell us. I mean, I look at the film. I think everything Quincy did is sustainable. It just seems like things clicked for him. I think he was a little bit of a late bloomer. You have to remember, this is a guy that was waived by the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2021. And I got to tell you, Jacksonville was not like Jacksonville had a ton of talent on them in 2021. Maybe it was a bad decision. I mean, that was, the Urban Meyer year, but he just got better. And I think it just feels like the game slowed down for him, because he was always a guy who's very aggressive, but sometimes he was out of control. It just felt like he was reading the plays better last year. So I'm very optimistic that Quincy Williams is going to continue to be an excellent player. I think his game is built to age well. I just think I liked everything about him. He's become one of my favorite players. I mean, an amazing story. He's waived by the Jacksonville Jaguars, the brother of Quinnen Williams, and suddenly now he's playing at a first-team All-Pro level. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic about Quincy continuing to play at a very high level. And our last question, do you think the results of the NFL Sunday Ticket lawsuit will lead the fans to be able to purchase a single game, like a la carte ordering instead of the entire package? Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you the results. So I'll just tell you, I hope so. The best thing about Sunday Ticket is they finally got it off DirecTV last year. They went to YouTube, which I think was a big upgrade. When Sunday Ticket was launched back in the 90s, it was a revolutionary product. It was difficult to explain now if you didn't experience it. But it used to be, you just got like 2-3 games a week, and that was it. And you had no opportunity. If you were an out of market fan, you just had to hope your team was on the local channel, or, on playing Monday Night Football or something like that. I mean, I remember years ago, I read this book by Peter King, the former writer at Sports Illustrated and NBC. He talked about how he knew one San Francisco 49ers fan during the 80s, during the Montana years. He got his information about the 49ers. He couldn't watch the games because he lived in New York. So a family member clipped out articles about the 49ers in the newspaper and mailed them to him. So, you think about the technological innovations over the last, several decades, it's pretty amazing. NFL Sunday Ticket was a revolutionary product when DirecTV launched it in the 90s, and they never innovated until last year. And one of the things that's amazed me is that, every other league has been focused on making their games more available to fans, focused on creating a better experience watching games. The NFL is like hidden their games. You used to have to get DirecTV to watch the games. Satellite dish. Not everybody got a satellite dish. So they ended up coming up with this product that was available for only people who lived in buildings that could not have satellite dishes. It was a streaming service. It was horrible. I had it for a stretch. It was a terrible, terrible product. It was glitchy. Sometimes the games would cut off. You couldn't really rewind it. You couldn't rewind. It was terrible compared to what the other leagues had. So I'm just hoping the NFL improves its offering. I think the move to DirecTV, the move to YouTube TV off DirecTV was a good one. And I know that this is my understanding is that this lawsuit is to allow fans to if you only want to watch the Jets, just buy a package with the Jets. It's a little cheaper. And I know some of the other leagues have adopted a model like this at various points in time where you just watch your team's games. I think it would be great for the fans. I think it would be great for the league. This is a day and age where we're really customizing products for consumers who are watching streaming services. So I don't know why the NFL doesn't do this. The NFL is not responsive to its fans. I think part of the problem is the NFL is so successful that they've reached a point where they feel like they don't need to be responsive to their fans. So I'm hopeful. Will it happen? That's anybody's guess. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday to talk more Jets.